So last week we gave some introduction. We studied a little bit of this. We also focused on the resurrection. So tonight I'm going to again, just for the people those who are joining, just quickly recap some of those things. We talked about science. We talked about science versus God, faith, design, origin, randomness, and all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to start again with this false dichotomy. So people will usually talk about what? Science or God. So choose between science or God. So that's the thing that they're going to talk to you. But that is a completely false dichotomy. That's what I told you, because some of the people in the field, they don't like God. So what is the best way to avoid God is they use their authority in science to say that, to push God out of the field. So that is why they always bring either you choose science or God. I gave a couple of examples also last week, but that should not be the case. So again, some might say science or faith in God. So we talked about, I gave an example about thermodynamics. I'm not going to read the whole thing. So the idea is the laws of thermodynamics. Basically, this is the backbone of how your automobile works. So you put fuel and you made the combustion, and then you get the power stroke. So you get the cycle starts. So you have basically the basics of thermodynamics, how it works. So if somebody asks you, either you choose between thermodynamics or you choose between Henry Ford. So he is the one who actually used those thermodynamics and then created this car. So what if somebody comes to him and say, hey, choose between thermodynamics and Henry Ford? What is the answer for the automobile or the motor car? So what do you say? You need both, because you need this guy, this engineer who used his brains and also applied the laws of thermodynamics to get this motor car running. So if somebody comes and asks, say, choose between science and God, it is the same thing what they are saying, like choose between thermodynamics or Henry Ford for the motor car. So basically you need these two things. So of course we know from the Bible, from the other parts, that God sets everything in motion. We are going to see some scriptures as well. But again, since we studied this material last week, I'm just going to skip, and those who are watching, maybe you can pause and read this for yourselves. So this is basically a false dichotomy. So laws of thermodynamics versus Henry Ford, which one? For the existence of a motor car, you need both. You need both to have that. So, and this other thing that we talked about is what? Faith. So do you have faith? So I talked to you, so immediately when I ask that question, most of the time people say, yeah, I have faith, right? But instead of that, you should have asked me, faith in what? Faith in the chair that where you sat, that it holds you? Or faith in this building that it will not collapse on us? Faith in what? So faith is basically, the definition we saw earlier, is a complete trust or confidence in someone or something. So it is not just, when people talk about faith, it is not always, of course, they meant religious faith, but you can turn around and say faith in what? So then you can turn around and ask, does the atheists have faith? They have faith too. Because what kind of faith is that? They believe in something, especially they believe in something, so that is their faith. So I think I gave an example about a professor where he went and talked to an atheist, and this atheist objected to him saying, hey, John, you're born in a Christian family, that's why you got your Christian faith. So John was offended, and then he turned around and said, hey, mister, what about you? You didn't tell about your family. Are your parents atheists? Yeah, they are atheists. So, you got your faith from them then? No, I don't have faith. I thought you believe in that stuff. So basically the argument is he believed in what he believes, so that is their faith. So anyway, so the faith is a complete trust or confidence in someone or something. So what about atheism? Atheism is a disbelief or lack of belief in the existence of God or gods. Atheists, they say that there is no God. That is as simple as that. So disbelief or lack of belief in the existence of God or God. Again, when they say that, think about this, when they say that, they have some belief even for that. When they say that they don't believe in God, even for that statement, they believe in that statement. So although they say that they do not have faith, but they have faith in the belief that no God exists, right? So they believe that. So in turn, that itself is a faith to say that there is no God. So it is not just applying to you as a Christian that you have believe in God. Even atheists have faith that they believe that there is no God, so that they have their faith. So it is they have their faith and you have your faith. So don't get wrong, because sometimes they only try to push on one side. So they have their faith and you have your faith. So what does the Bible say? So forget about all these arguments. So what does the Bible say? Bible is very clear. God says, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Of course, this argument, when we are talking with someone, you can't take this Bible and say, hey, Bible says this, you can't take this. But just I'm saying these things, I'm going in parallel with the Bible. I just don't want to make this as a science class. Of course, I'm going to teach you all these things that you can defend, but also what does the Bible say? So we are going to see in parallel. So Bible is clear. It says, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. The person may be a very high-ranking scientist. He may be a Nobel Prize winner. But Bible clearly says, a fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Why? Why does the Bible say that? Okay, but we are supposed not to just blindly believe, but God has given us reason. There are other passages, even God says, the heavens declare the glory of God. So there are certain things that we are going to study tonight. Without God, no one can explain. You see my point? One of that is the heavens declare the glory of God. Now you have this Hubble telescope. Now you have the James Webb new telescope that went millions of miles away and then still started trying to find something. So there is so much of creation out there, and you have to explain the origin of this. So keep this in mind. One thing, if you take out of this whole series of classes, write down this word origin. This is the one word that you can ask anyone who is going to dispute about God, and then think just origin. Origin of life, right? That's one point. Origin of life. We're going to study in detail, but I'm just giving you the topics that we are going to study. So how are you going to explain the origin of life? Okay? That is one important question they have to explain if somebody says something. And then the second one is origin of the whole universe. How does the whole universe came into being? How did the whole universe came into existence? These two things somebody has to explain before they say something. If they say there is no God, okay, explain these two. So here are the two things that they have to explain. You cannot just bypass. But if they come back and say, hey, okay, go ahead and explain. If they ask the same question to us, what are you going to say? How are you going to explain? Okay, so we push the ball in their court. They couldn't explain because we asked these two questions. And when they turn around and say, okay, now you go ahead and explain, how are you going to explain? What's your answer? You must be prepared to give an answer for this. So that is what we are going to study. With this, just these two, of course, there are so many arguments, so many things that we can go. But these two basic things, origin of life, no scientist can explain as of today. I checked everything. As of today, no scientist can explain the origin of life. You can take that for granted, because there is no explanation for the origin of life. They can come up with theories. I can come up with my theory. It is not the theory that we want, the explanation of exactly how the origin of life. That one they cannot explain. And also again the origin of the whole universe. So the false dichotomy, as we studied, they give you an option to choose between science or God, but that is completely a false dichotomy. Science explains the laws. We studied thermodynamics and then the laws of gravity and all kinds of laws there. The science explains the laws. God is the one who brought those laws into existence and set everything into motion. So God is the one. Without God, you can't explain. That's my point. So no scientist can explain these things without bringing God into the equation. Of course, that is the one who they are trying to push out. They are trying to push God out. But the question is, how are you going to explain the origin of life? How are you going to explain the origin of the whole universe? How did this came into being? So we are going to study in detail, but I'm just giving you the highlights of this. So, and then the other thing they say is, if you are a scientist, you cannot believe in God, because how can scientist and God goes together? That's the argument. They will try to always push right? They always try to say, choose between this one of these two. But I want to present to you some numbers. That is, of course, these people will try to brainwash our students, brainwash our kids who goes to universities and all that. But I want to present with you some numbers to just check for yourselves here. So how many of the physics Nobel Prize winners are Christians? Let's see. By one estimate made by Weijia Zhang from Arizona State University and Robert G. Fuller from University of Nebraska-Lincoln, between 1901 to 1990, 60% of them are physics Nobel Prize winners had Christian backgrounds. So the whole idea what they were trying to say is the science and God cannot exist. So if you are a scientist, you cannot be a Christian, you cannot believe in God. But here is a number that speaks for itself. These are the physicists, the Nobel Prize winners. We are talking about Nobel Prize winners. So Christian Nobel Prize winners between 1901 and 1990, we have 60% of physics Nobel Prize winners had Christian backgrounds. How do you explain that? If they are so much into their science, if they could prove everything, then they could just walk out of their Christian faith, but that's not the case. In an estimate by Bart Shalev, between 1901 and 2000, about 65.3% of physics Nobel Prize winners were either Christians or had Christian backgrounds. So here the range is between 1901 and 2000. It's a little lengthier range, but still the percentage is way up high. 65.3% of them are Nobel Prize winners are Christians. And what about chemistry? So you have a similar estimate here, mind-boggling. 72.5% of chemistry Nobel Prize winners were either Christians or had Christian background. So the reason I am presenting this is there is a sense of false understanding that science and God will not coexist, or if you are a scientist, you cannot believe in God, things like that. But what I am showing you is more than 60% of the physics Nobel Prize winners are Christians, or at least have a Christian background, and 72.5% of chemistry Nobel Prize winners are either Christians or had Christian background. So you don't have to be ashamed. Sometimes people say, you don't have to be ashamed of God and the gospel, and you don't have to be ashamed because the Nobel Prize winners, with 72.5% of them in the chemistry, they believe in God, they believe in Christ, they believe somehow have some Christian background. What about psychology or medicine, right? In an estimate by the same guy, again between 1901 and 2000, about 62% of medicine Nobel Prize winners were either Christians or had Christian background. Do you see that? There is a pattern always there. It's more than 60%, 65%, 72% in all these fields, physics, chemistry, and medicine, psychology or medicine. You have overwhelmingly a lot of people having Christian backgrounds. So there's so many have the Christian backgrounds with the 62%. So then what are the main objections? So the objections are, we're going to study faith. We talked about this last week. And we talked about resurrection. And we talked about resurrection. And here now there is again another one we are going to study tonight is intelligent design. I just alluded to this. Like if you are walking on the Clearwater beach and you see your name written there, what do you think?
Somebody wrote.
Immediately you say there is a mind behind it. Somebody wrote it, right? You don't come up and say because the waves keep crashing on the shore, so it just created my name there, right? It's just a chance that it happened. You will never say that. When you see your name, maybe 3 characters, 5 characters, whatever it is, when you see something, immediately you are going to put what? There is a mind behind this. You're going to say that there is a mind behind this. And then the other objection is Genesis 1. Of course, we all know in the Genesis how it starts. In the beginning, God created, right? So it states in the beginning God created. When you say in the beginning God created, there comes the objection to the whole thing. Because if you don't believe in God, then that is an objection. So that's why. So let me point this. Sometimes people are misled, some Christians even. They say, oh, I am a Christian, but I do not believe in Genesis 1. Okay, so let me ask you, what else you don't believe? What about Genesis 2? What about Genesis 3? What about Revelation 22? Okay, you take Genesis 1, 2, 3 out, and then you take Revelation out. So if you take all these things, and then the whole thing falls apart. You see my point? Either you believe the whole Bible or not. There is no option for me to pick and choose. So I cannot say, oh, I don't believe in the creation account. I don't believe in Jesus Christ is going to come back and rule and reign in Revelation. So you can't take these things out. So that is the problem. If you started the selecting. So if you are a true Christian, you believe the authority of the Word of God. Why do I believe that? Even Jesus said, when Jesus was teaching to his disciples, always what is he using is, he is pointing to the Old Testament, the Scriptures. He is pointing to the Old Testament Scriptures. So even on the road to Emmaus, what did he say? All the Scriptures were talking about me, so they're about the Christ. So there is no way you can just take away some chapters and say, I am a Christian. So I am clear on that because that's what Bible teaches about it. And of course, the whole authority of the Word of God, the Bible. So this is how it starts. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So this statement includes everything. So when you say the two extremes, the heavens is the whole universe that you can see. So sometimes people think heavens as the heavens where the God seated, his throne and all that. That's not the idea here. Heavens is basically the birds fly in the heavens. The language used in Psalms and all that. The heavens declare the glory of God. The idea is that whatever you see with your eye, wide open, that's all the heavens. That's what talking about. So basically the whole universe and the earth, so that includes everything. So God created everything, in other words. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is very clear, Genesis 1:1. And what about John 1:1? When you come to John is trying to connect these dots. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. You underline the word. In the beginning was the Word. He was in the beginning with God, that's the word, Logos. All things were made through him. And without him nothing was made that was made. It is so clear for us. Everything was created by God. With all the scientific knowledge, with all the electron microscopes and all kinds of devices that we invented, we still have the problem that nobody can explain. What is the problem I talked about earlier? The origin of life and the origin of the universe. That still remains. And here it comes, the Word of God all along says, God created all this, right? So God created these things, and without him, nothing was made that was made. So tonight I'm going to talk to you about what the scientists present to you, how this whole thing came into existence. Keep these things in mind, because Bible says on one side, everything God created. We are now going to see how the scientists are going to explain these things. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Of course, we talked about this word, the Logos. Logos, in other words, meaning is a reason. So the Word of God, a word. So here the Word is attributed to Jesus Christ. So he was in the beginning, he was with God, and the Word came and took on flesh, and he dwelt among us. So you all know this, John 1:1 and 14, verse 14 there. Some atheists believe the mind is an end product of a mindless, unguided process. You know why they say that? So your mind is an end product of a mindless, unguided process. Let that sink in. Because the reason for this statement is, how did everything came into existence? Like, there was a soup, some kind of a soup, chemical soup, and out of it came life. So everything unguided, randomness, right? So out of all that chaos came the life, and then how you got into a lower level of life forms, and then you upgraded to a next level of forms. Maybe you came from a monkey and things like that. So all that to say, this is what it is. Some atheists believe the mind is an end product of mindless, unguided process. Because nobody designed it. Nobody designed any of this. It all just came by randomness and chance. Survival of the fittest. These are the words Darwin used, right? So everything is mindless, unguided. So let me ask you a question. You go to Best Buy or some store and ask them, hey, I want to buy a computer which was not designed, which was randomly assembled. It was nobody designed anything there. I want to buy a computer which is a mindless, unguided process. Do you buy it? No, because so you don't even buy a computer which was not properly designed, right? Even sometimes, think about this, even when it is so meticulously designed and carefully done, we still find some bugs in it, like errors or whatever, right? So the point is, you cannot just expect some randomness. You cannot expect an order out of our randomness. That's what my point is. It is something like, somebody explained this. If you have a junkyard and out comes a tornado or something just passed through this junkyard, right? And out of that came a Boeing 777, whatever, right? So nicely flying out of this junkyard. So will that happen? So the idea is, it is much more complex than that. So a mind, a reasoning mind, a thinking mind, all that happened just by random and chance. So that is what they are trying to explain to you. So you need to understand. So if that mind came just by random and chance, can you trust it? Because it just is a random thing. So it just came out of, so how can you trust even the process that was not designed, right? So you cannot trust the process that just came out of that. So the atheists believe the mind is an end product of a mindless, unguided process. So if that is so, then you cannot even trust that. You cannot trust what they say, because that is an unguided process. It's a random process. You see the point, logic there? Even just thinking, little bit of thinking will explain, hey, it is an unguided and random process. How can I even trust that? So that is the point there. Scientists for years have posited that life originated in a primordial soup in an ancient atmosphere and a sea rich in hydrogen, methane, and ammonia and water vapor, with atmospheric lightning stirring the pot, amino acids, the building blocks of the primordial soup, eventually aggregated and began assembling a primitive life. So this is the explanation that the scientists give to you for the origin of life. So this is the explanation from a scientific journal, how the beginning of the origin of life. So there was some kind of a primordial soup which has these elements, hydrogen, methane, ammonia, and water vapor, and there was some lightning and all that, and all these things came together somehow, and that is the beginning of the first life, the very first life, so to speak. This is just a theory. That's what I keep saying. So this is just a theory. So the question was, can the scientists take all this thing and create something in the lab with a life again? So the answer is no. Somebody tried to do something. The max they can go to is to create the basic building blocks. Basic building blocks are different from the whole building. You agree with me? Basic building, if I have a basic building blocks created, and not even the building, we're talking about big cities. I'm going to explain this whole thing, how complex it is. Not just a building, it's a big city. So now we have the basic building blocks. Even given that, okay, so the scientists were able to create the basic building blocks with some kind of experiment. How did they do that? Under a controlled environment. Controlled, and keep that in mind. But earlier their definition was this was all happened in random. So they were able to do this some kind of a controlled, which again gives some lot of input. You have to give all this input to make this thing happen. But their definition is it was a primordial soup. That is how you got the first life. And again, there are so many problems even with this kind of explanation, right? So even if given the point, okay, so this is how the life began. But then how did it get to the next level? How did it get to the next level? How did it, so this cannot explain all those things. But even given this explanation, so they were far behind in explaining how all these things came together. So of course, Darwin, he gave some evolution details. I'm going to explain that, what he explained, the difference between the macro and micro and all the evolution and all that. But the basic definition, in the beginning, of course, the Bible said in the beginning God created, but for scientists, in the beginning, this is the primordial soup. So there were all these elements, and there was some lightning, and some kind of energy went in, and then everything came together and formed the first life in itself. and that life started expanding, and that is where we are now. All unguided, random process. Okay, so that is what scientists explain even today. So the primordial soup hypothesis received a dramatic support in 1953 when a young American graduate student named Stanley Miller, supervised by Nobel Prize winner Harold Urey, conducted a famous experiment. Miller mixed 4 simple chemicals in a glass tubes which were heated and shocked with electric sparks to mimic lightning. The experiment made several amino acids, the building blocks of proteins. So this is what I was explaining. You can create the basic building blocks with some kind of a controlled environment. Again, you are controlling everything. You are giving the lightning. You are making everything. But at the end, where you ended up with is a basic building block, some amino acids. That is not life in itself. So you can't create life. But what they get to the point is all they have is only some few building blocks. Okay, but it is apparent that random conditions were not maintained, right? So at the genesis of life, some intelligence was involved in the chemical reactions. The conclusion is unavoidable because a law of nature could not alone explain how life began, because no conceivable law would impel a legion of atoms to follow precisely a prescribed sequence of assemblage. So no matter how you try to do this, all this randomness will not create life. They try to create in the lab, but all they got is just basic building blocks. Even that was done by a controlled substances, controlled environment. The question of how life began is one of the most profound in science, and altogether many theories exist. Scientists still cannot agree to an answer. So this is the key that I want you to remember, because if somebody comes and says science have all the answers, this is how they tell you. So science has all the answers, right? Science explains everything. You don't need God for this to explain. So that is what the premises is. But now, here are the scientists saying we don't have all the answers. The question of how life began is one of the most profound in science, and altogether many theories exist. Scientists still cannot agree on an answer. So it continues to be a topic for debate, as understanding life's origin could help us grasp our place in the universe, as well as guiding our search for extraterrestrial life. So when you run out of options, when you cannot explain something, where do you look to? Somewhere outside. That's what scientists say. Maybe aliens might have seeded some life in our planet. So these are the answers from the scientists. I'm not just making it up. These are the answers that you hear in the scientific community. Maybe aliens seeded some life on this planet Earth. And people believe it. So you have to have a lot of faith in this kind of stuff. That's what my point is. So if you don't understand the backbone of what all this, how these things are explained, I think people will fall for it. Oh, science have all the answers. Then why do we need God? So that's how the minds are corrupted. People started listening to all these kinds of stuff. However, making life from scratch has proved to be a lot of more complicated than Miller's experiment suggested. Right? So you can't create life. You can't create life. That's the point. Even for them to do anything, they need the basic life to build on it. So how do you start that life is the question. Everything is how the origin of life. Of course, we are now able to do using some of the life forms to do something else. But the question is not that. The question is, how did you get that first life? How the life originated? That was the question. So now that comes to the topic called intelligent design, and sometimes we call it as ID. So the most common objection to ID is that it is not science but religion. Why? When you go and talk to some scientists and say, hey, probably this may be an intelligent design, immediately they will object. The reason for that is they immediately connect the dots, which goes to the Bible. In the beginning, God created, because there is an intelligent mind. Of course, they see the intelligence in it. They see the design. They even call that design. They call in the theories, hey, this is wonderful design and all that. But they will remove the intelligent design. The reason is it requires a designer. Do you see that? You need a designer, and of course that's God. So that is why they want to avoid this. Of course, they see the design. They see the intelligent design in everything. So the most common objection to ID is that it is not science. Why they call that is because they think it is connecting the dots closer to the religion, closer to the Bible, closer to the Word of God. So that is why they want to avoid this. So to understand why this objection is flawed, we must first appreciate how ID theorists argue for a design. Right? So we are going to see a few examples here. Intelligent design is a scientific theory that holds that many features of this universe and living things are best explained by an intelligent cause rather than an undirected process like natural selection. Intelligent design aims to discriminate between objects generated by material mechanisms and those caused by intelligence. So there are two kinds of tracks we are tracking here. One is the natural processes, like some elements coming together, like mountains forming, all kinds of stuff, just the natural process. And the other one is it must be caused by a design. It must be caused by intelligent design, because randomness cannot create this kind of complexity. Randomness cannot create this kind of a sophisticated mechanism. Randomness cannot create a sophisticated universe where everything runs like a oil machine, right? We're going to there is another topic we're going to see probably next week. For tonight, we are going to study the intelligent design. So the ID theorists start by observing how intelligent agents act when they design things. By studying human intelligent agents, we learn that when intelligent agents act, they generate high levels of information. You see that? There is a component called information. When there is intelligence, when there is a designer, you have to underline this word called information. Information you cannot just randomly create. Information is something, a mind has to be behind it. That's the point. So underline this word information. This is the one that that will stop them on their tracks. Information is very important. That they generate high levels of information. The type of information that indicates design is generally called specified complexity, or complex and specified information for short. Specified complexity. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples here. So roughly speaking, something is complex if it is unlikely. So sometimes if it is so complex, you may say it may not happen because it's so complex, right? But those things we see happening even though it is complex. Am I making sense? Complex things do happen. Of course, there are some complex things that happen. Of course, it is the rate of happening may be less, but some complex things do happen. That is my point, okay? So there is a difference between that kind of a complexity and a specified complexity where it requires a lot of design and information. So we're going to see the difference. But complexity or unlikelihood alone is not enough to infer design. So if you see something very complex, right, you cannot just go to the scientist and argue, say, hey, see the complexity here? That's the hand of God. You cannot argue like that, because the point is there are complex things that can happen even at randomness. So just by complexity, you cannot argue. That is the point. So you have to have some other information before you go and talk to them. So to see why, imagine that you are dealt a 5-card hand for a poker game, right? So whatever hand you receive is going to be very unlikely. Even if you get a good hand, like a straight or a royal flush, you are not necessarily going to say, aha, the deck was stacked. Why? Because unlikely things happen all the time. Right? If you get all the royal flush, so sometimes they do happen. Of course, it is not frequent, but sometimes the complex things do happen. So that in itself is not evidence for some kind of intelligent design or anything. That's what my point is. So we don't infer design simply because of some things being unlikely. We need more. According to the ID theorist William Dembski, that is called specification. So we need specification. Something is specified if it matches an independent pattern. So I'm introducing so many things. So just for the discussion, just for your understanding, keep two things in mind. One is complex, just anything complex. And then within that complexity, more specified information. So you have specified information and then just general complexity itself. So general complexity can happen although it is complex. That's what the point is. Look at this mountain, right? Mountain Rainier in Washington State. It is complex. It has all kinds of, waves and paths and craves, all kinds of things. If you just look at it, this is a complex one. But you cannot just say there is an intelligent mind behind this. It could have been created by a volcano or whatever, the eruption, or by erosion of, over the years. So here is the first point example. This is complexity. This mountain is complex. So this mountain is unique. In fact, if all possible combinations of rocks, peaks, ridges, gullies, cracks and crags are considered, its exact shape is extremely unlikely and complex, right? But you don't infer design simply because Mount Rainier has a complex shape. You don't infer design. Somebody designed it like this. You can't say that. You see my point? You cannot just go to the mountain and say, hey, somebody designed this. So, although it is complex, so that is the point I want to make here. Because you can easily explain its shape through the natural process of erosion, uplift, heating, cooling, freezing, thawing, weathering, etc. There is no special independent pattern to shape of Mount Rainier. Its complexity alone is not enough to infer design. When we are arguing with the scientists, when we are talking about trying to explain this thing, we are not just picking up on the complexity, just like this mountain, right? Just like this mountain, we are not just picking up this and say, hey, because this is so complex, somebody has to, somebody designed this. That's not the argument goes. Of course, this is just a simple example for the bigger picture of life that we are talking about. So now, think about this. So keep these two things in mind. So one, very complex, and now this just came like that. So, this just happened to be like, it just, there was a volcano. Out of this came all these four faces out of it, right? So that is, I am trying to contrast. Both are complex, right? So of course, complexity in itself is not the evidence that you can argue. But what we are trying to say is, you are seeing something like this, and now you are telling me this happened by random chance. That is all. That's what you are hearing from the scientific community. That's what I am saying. And multiply this by 1,000,000 times, complexity-wise and the skill and all that you see here. Multiply this by 1,000,000 times for the cell structure, for the life to begin and all that. And that is what they are arguing and saying everything happened by chance, everything happened by randomness. Okay, the first mountain happened by randomness, chance, okay, I can believe that. But this one, there is a specificity, there is a design, that is what we are talking about. So always keep these two in mind, these two mountains in mind. So that gives you a very good indication of what you're talking about, how the life began. So what they're arguing is, they look at something like this and saying, this just happened by a chance and random chance. If we cannot even believe this one, if I tell you I went to South Dakota, that just happened by random chance. Even this we cannot believe, but then how are you going to believe 1,000,000 times, more than 1,000,000 times complex than this, what I'm showing you here for the beginning of life? How are you going to explain that? So that is the whole point. So I'm just trying to show you with some simple examples here. So now you visit a different mountain, Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. This mountain also has a very unlikely shape, but its shape is special. It matches a pattern, the faces of 4 famous presidents. With Mount Rushmore, you don't just observe complexity, you also find specification or design. Thus, you would infer that its shape was designed, right? So it was designed. So here is a human cell, a single cell. I'm talking about a single human cell. This is how it looks like, the detailed model of a human single cell, the complexity of this. So another view of the same human cell. This is so complex. I'm saying when you compare with the Mount Rushmore thing, if you cannot believe that it came by random chance, this is impossible. This is 1,000,000 times, even more than that complex than what Mount Rushmore we're talking about. So now I want to show you a video.